Having now done several case studies individually, I want to step back and more abstractly look at the common patterns of argument and counter-argument that go on in the individual case studies. So far we've looked at the tragedy of the commons, the issue of rent control, minimum wage, the laetrile case over experimental pharmaceuticals, and the fairness doctrine as it applied in the telecommunications industry. And in each case, there was controversy about how to analyze the case, what were the business facts on the ground, what ethical principles we should look to strive for a good solution, and the degree to which government involvement is properly the solution to the case on the ground. So what I want to do is step back and see how, in each case, the controversy represented polarized positions in all three of the areas. So if we take, for example, the tragedy of the commons position, right? One position on one side of the debate was typically arguing that the problem with the tragedy of the commons is that you have these selfish, greedy individuals who are taking from the common stock of resources more than they need, that they're not considering other people. In fact, they are harming other people in order to advance themselves. So what we have here is language that is predation, right? They're using the language of predation, right? And they're using greed here, right, as a pejorative. And the argument is that the commons could work if only people were not so predatory. That is to say, if they were not thinking about their self-interest, if instead they were thinking of the interests of other people, interests in the community as a whole, and if they were willing to give up or sacrifice certain profitable opportunities to use resources for the sake of the common good. And so predation here is the problem, and the solution from their perspective is much more a matter of altruism. So that's to focus on the ethics language. If you noticed when they were talking about the economic language, the language was in terms of a zero-sum scenario. The tragedy of the commons is my, say, putting more of my cattle out in the pasture, but my putting more cattle out in the pasture means that there's less pasture resources for you to use. So my benefit is your loss. And the solution then in this particular case was to say that in a free market, we're going to have a zero sum. It's not going to be good for you or me in the long run. And of course, the resource ends up depleted, right, which is the tragedy, that the problem was leaving people free to do whatever they wanted with this common resource, and instead what we need to do is have government management, right, of the resource, right, that we should preserve the resource as a commons, right, as a social resource to be used by all, and the government will set the policies under which it can be used. It will ration, it will conscript, it will tax and police, right, and so forth. Now, the other side of the debate, when we were looking at tragedy of the commons, had a different ethical analysis, a different analysis of the facts on the ground, and a different political solution. Right, their argument was that you were ending up with these zero-sum results, not because of the self-interested motivation of the people, but because there was an inappropriate institutional arrangement. And so what we can and should do is privatize, right, the resource. That is to say, turn it into private property and have the government, so to speak, protect people's property rights. And if we do that, then what this is going to do is unleash, right, certain egoistic motives. And so people then will become self-responsible. They will have their own property. They will have pride of ownership. Right, they will realize that how they do with their resources, right, is up to them, and so they will better manage their resource, and so they will be much more creative and they will be much more productive with respect to the use of the resource, and then as a result, right, we will end up with a win-win, right, scenario. It's to my advantage to look after my private property. It's to your advantage to look after your private property. And to the extent that we both do that, we can work out mutually beneficial ways. I can learn from you, you can learn from me, we can trade, right, and so on. But the point here is that in this case here, from this perspective, what the analysis is to strive for a win-win economic solution by changing the institutional problem, and that the self-interested profit motivation is perfectly fine. By contrast, on the other side, the profit motive and greed are seen as more naturally leading to predation and zero-sum transactions, and so the only solution then is to override that by means of government to try to get people through legislative means to act more altruistically, communally, and so on. When we turn to the rent control case, all right, one side in favor of rent control, the other side opposed to rent control. The side that was opposed to rent control made the argument that by the time we are adults, we are self-responsible individuals. Nobody has an obligation to put a roof over our heads, or if we want to be landlords and that's our business, no one has an obligation to come and give me money for rental property. And so it's up to me to be self-responsible. I have to get a job so that I can pay the rent. Or I have to make my rental apartments attractive enough so that other people will want to rent them. So the assumption here is that landlords and tenants are both self-responsible individuals who are bringing stuff to the table. That the relationship between landlords and tenants, even in low rent, less desirable property, nonetheless still is a win-win transaction. Both parties are reaching a voluntary agreement, all things considered, that's beneficial to them. And the job of the government, again, in this case, is to protect people's private property rights or to protect people's liberty to associate with whomever they want. The tenant can live where he chooses. He doesn't have to live there. Landlords can rent out to whomever they want, right, and so on. The other side of the debate had a different scenario. Their argument was that under circumstances of rent control, what we have is a situation of scarcity. There's not enough to go around. As a result of that, there is rental prices are very high, and so what we have is landlords in the bargaining power position. They're the stronger party. It's a seller's market, and tenants who are typically poorer and so forth are in a weaker position, and also since it's a seller's market, they have to, so to speak, take what they can get, and that then sets it up for landlords being greedy, being able to prey on the poorer, weaker tenants. And so given this circumstance, the only thing we can do is have the government step in, override free market prices, and establish a rent ceiling. All right, so again, we have the similar language that is going on there. In the case of minimum wage, right, the argument from this side was minimum wages are not appropriate. People should pay what they can contract for or get other people to agreeably pay to them. By the time we are adults entering the job market, we're self-responsible, nobody owes us a job, and we should be paid according to our productivity. So if I'm a younger person without many skills, without much experience, I shouldn't be expected to be paid a certain minimum amount unless I'm actually worth that amount to someone who voluntarily, right, wants to do so. Same thing holds on the other side of the transaction. Potential employers, it's up to them to make the potential jobs attractive enough so that people want to take those jobs. And the idea then is employer and employee relationships, even at the low end of the employment market, are win-win transactions if it's voluntary, self-responsible adults who are doing so. And we should leave people free. The job of the government should be to protect people's liberty rights to take jobs or to offer jobs under whatever circumstances, right, they are willing to do so. The other side of the analysis, again, would take the position that that's not the right way, set of concepts, right, to bring, so to speak, to bear on this case. Instead, what we have is a situation where the employers are in the stronger position. In this case, it's a buyer's market. They have low-skill jobs and they don't have very many of them. On the other hand, we have lots of people who want those jobs, and so they're in a less strong bargaining position. Also, employers are typically richer, have more business savvy. Poorer, younger, inexperienced workers are economically weaker, and so that puts employers in a position to exploit in a predatory fashion their employees, and again the employees become victimized, right, by it as a result of this. So what we have then is another zero sum, right, or a win-lose transactions where employers get what they want out of the transaction and employees do not. And so the proper solution from this perspective then again is to have the government override free market prices and institute a price floor. So again, the same sets of concepts coming to bear on each other. In the case of laetrile, let's start with this side of the argument first. The argument was that what we had is pharmaceutical manufacturers with this experimental drug who are really just interested in profit motive, and profit then is seen as a dirty word. They're just greedy. They don't necessarily care about the health of their patients. But they are in a position, though, of strength because the cancer patients are more vulnerable, they're more desperate, they don't have the medical knowledge to be able to make good decisions here. And so what we then end up with is another zero-sum transaction if laetrile were to be legalized. The pharmaceutical manufacturer would make lots of money, patients would not get appropriate cancer treatments, and they would be out money and opportunity costs and so forth. And so the argument here is, in a paternalistic fashion, what the government should do is intervene in the pharmaceutical market and ban a particular product, protect the weak from making bad decisions that they might make on their own, and stop the strong from preying on those weaker parties. Now, the other side of the debate took the position that that is insulting to all parties, that if I am a cancer patient, yes, I am in a very difficult, sobering situation, but nonetheless, I still am a self-responsible adult. I should be free to make my own decisions about my health care, including what treatments I'm going to take in the case. I should, if I have my own money, be able to spend my money on buying various medical treatments if I so choose. The pharmaceutical manufacturer is being productive here, putting something out on the market that might work. He's not forcing anybody to take the medications, and so that's a liberty issue as well. And the argument is that whether you agree or not, whether you would purchase this product or not is not the point, but to the extent that there are transactions that occur, it's because both parties are making a judgment that is beneficial to them, and so they walk away from the transaction with what they want rather. So we have self-responsible adults, and we should treat people as self-responsible adults who have certain liberty rights and property rights, and they will work out win-win transactions in a free market. When we turn to the fifth case on our list here, the fairness doctrine case, again, similar patterns of argument emerge, right? The one side is arguing that if I am the owner of a radio station, right, I have a license, I have a transmitter, I've got the real estate, I've got all the equipment. That's my private property, and if I am going to publish and publicize various information, I should have the liberty to say whatever I want on my particular radio station, and the government should protect my rights. And the same thing, of course, holds on the other side. Listeners should have the right to listen or not listen to my programming. Nobody is forcing them to do so. And so we should treat people who are listening to the radio as self-responsible adults who can make their own decisions about what to listen to, whether they agree with what they are hearing or not. And so to that extent, we have win-win transactions that work out in communication. The other side of the argument, when the case of the fairness doctrine, was saying that we do need to have government management of the flow of information, right, in this particular case, that we can't or shouldn't treat radio stations as private property with robust liberty rights. Instead, we need to have a certain amount of intervention, a certain amount of paternalism. And the argument here is that we do have win-lose transactions. In this case, the broadcaster is the stronger party, who is able to broadcast his or her message to a large number of people, to decide who gets on the radio and who does not get on the radio. And the listening audience is seen as then potentially victimized or potentially manipulable. If they're only hearing one side of a debate on an important controversial issue, then a significant number of them are going to have their minds shaped or shifted right in a certain direction, that they won't be truly independent thinkers, and so they won't vote in an informed way in democracies. And so we have these strong broadcasters controlling the flow of information and manipulating the opinions of the broader population. And that's a kind of exploitation, obviously sometimes for profit. They're not in a public-minded way being fair and sharing their resources with anybody who wants to say something significant. And so we again have a zero sum that needs to be overridden. Now the point of all of this then is to say, abstracting from the particulars of all of these cases, right? This is about resource use in general. This is about real estate. This is about employer-employee payments. This is about pharmaceuticals. This is about telecommunications. So it's a wide range of economic and business values, right, that are at stake. But what we find in all of the cases is an argument on one side that embodies and deploys these concepts in ethics, in economics, and politics to analyze and solve the case. And on the other side, a position that deploys these concepts in ethics, economics, and politics to both analyze and solve the case. So the point then in summary is when analyzing a business ethics case study, one can take a significant amount of this as a template for solving a large majority of the cases, right? Look for a three-dimensional argument about ethics and economics, right, and politics, and in that debate, look for the concepts that are egoistic concepts, predatory concepts, altruistic concepts. Look for the win-win versus win-lose analysis. Look for the limited government free market solution, and look for the government management or interventionist paternalistic solution. If you identify all of those, that can go a long way to keeping all of the arguments and counter-arguments straight, and then as a template to guide your own thinking in deciding what you think the best solution to the case is.